Hello humanoids, welcome to Halfling Hobbies. I'm Halfling Hannah, and today I want to talk about something that DMs overlook all the time. We hardly ever give it a passing glance, but this one isn't just our faults, because players don't think about it either. I've seen players spend hours and hours on their character creation. They give me their character sheet, and it is so incredibly detailed with their backstory and with all of the parts of their character. And then I look at their tool proficiencies, and they've chosen something that doesn't even remotely seem to relate to their background because they didn't know what the tools were, what they meant, or why they should have them. And then, once we actually get into the campaign, the players forget all about their tools, I forget all about their tools, and suddenly we have this thing on the character sheet that apparently means nothing. So let's decide today, once and for all, are tools useless in Dungeons and Dragons? Let's find out. Here we go. So I've heard a lot of criticism on tools in 5e. 5e is honestly the only version that I've played, so I don't know for sure if they were more useful in the previous editions. If you've played those editions, could you please leave a comment down below and tell us if you found tools and tool proficiencies more useful in those editions. As far as 5e is concerned, you have some classes, backgrounds, even some races that will give you tool proficiencies in specific areas. And you can only get certain sets of tools using those backgrounds, such as thieves' tools or poisoners' kits. Things like that only come with certain backgrounds. Then there are other tools that aren't really mentioned in any backgrounds at all. And it leaves it up to the DM whether or not the player can have a proficiency in those tools. And most of the time, players don't take the time to look through the extensive list of tools that they could take because they simply don't see a need for them or a use for them, and DMs do a really poor job explaining the value of such things. So, what do tools do exactly in Dungeons & Dragons 5e? Well, tools actually help the players to create items instead of having to buy them. Tools allow players to come up with creative solutions to different situations. Tools also give players benefits in different ways, and maybe we'll dive into some of those as we go, but I'm not going to do all 22 in this video. That would be a little ridiculous. But each one gives players a different benefit for using that tool. And then, in my personal opinion, I feel like tools make player characters more believable. So let's dive into these different aspects of tools and see if we can figure out if they're useful or not, and if they are useful, how to use them. First of all, tools help players create items instead of having to purchase them. This can be very useful. I mean, one of the things that your players are going to be purchasing a lot of is potions of healing. And if you have an herbalist kit, you can create your own potions of healing. Some other things that you can create with other tools are shoes, which seems silly. You don't think about making things like that, but a cobbler's tools actually can help you out in difficult terrain and can help your party move at a faster pace if they have shoes. Another thing that you can make is glass bottles and vials. To put potions in or to use for different things. You can also have blacksmith tools to create weapons, to repair armor if you're doing something where your armor wears out or takes damage. So there are some useful things that you can create with tools. On the other side of that, most DMs don't bother with that stuff. Potions of healing are usually readily available wherever the players go, and it's much simpler simply to purchase them than to try and find ingredients to make them. I've never seen a DM use shoes, and I haven't seen one say that armor takes damage or that weapons break or that things need repaired. And usually there's a blacksmith in the area more than happy to repair such items for a small fee. And players are almost always so flooded with cash that they don't mind throwing money at their problems and upgrading their armor fairly regularly. If you're having a problem with that, by the way, I've got a video about how to know when you've given too much gold and rewards to give instead of gold to keep your game a little more interesting. So on the whole, creating things useful, not useful, depends on your game. In my particular game, I have to admit, it's not super useful, aside from my players creating some unique and interesting things, or perhaps creating things to sell. But as far as utility, unfortunately, tools just are kinda useless. Next up, tools are useful for finding creative ways out of certain situations. This I've found to actually be true. Some of these tools have different components in them that players can use in creative ways, such as the brewer's kit comes with 10 feet of tubing. You have no idea what players can figure out with 10 feet of tubing. It's ridiculous. So that has been super useful. Did you know that with woodworkers tools, you can spend a minute to fortify a door or a window and add +5 to the AC of that item? So if players are running away and they get a little distance away from a monster, they slam a door and they try and barricade it, woodworkers tools can actually come in very, very useful. Also, when trying to sneak, a woodworker can look at a wooden floor and kind of detect the soft spots in the floor somehow and avoid creaking noises while they're walking over wooden surfaces like that. And so it actually adds to their stealth modifier, which I find super interesting. So there are some situations where tools can create unique circumstances. And they can be super useful to help players get out of really difficult encounters. But this depends on your players. You have to have creative players, and you have to encourage that kind of creativity, which means your players are going to be doing crazy things sometimes with 10 feet of tubing. But you have to roll with it, and you have to expect them to be creative and reward them for such things. I like to use inspiration. I know that's a huge debate. If you want to see my thoughts on inspiration, there's a video for that. But the usefulness of tools in specific situations really depends on your players. And then finally, tools make PCs more well-rounded and believable. This, I honestly think, is true. It is highly unlikely that a person would simply train their entire life to become an adventurer. That's just not likely. It's more likely that they were in a profession and that they hated that profession or they hated that life and they gave it up to become an adventurer. That is far more likely. And with that being the case, then it means that they have a whole wealth of knowledge and understanding from their past profession that they can then use in their adventuring life. This makes PCs more believable as people who have had a job, who understand the way that the world works. I love to use tools as kind of a representation of that background knowledge, of that past life and experience. Not only do I let my players have different skills based on that profession that they had before, but I also have them draw up a list of contacts that they would have made during their time in that profession. Everyone has business contacts. If you've been in business at all, you know people because of that. And so it's really cool to create NPCs based on players' backgrounds and their business connections. It's something that a lot of people don't think about, but has become very, very useful to some of my players. They can call on these people from their past to help them with different things in different situations. So the tool itself isn't necessarily the end-all be-all of usefulness for creating rounded players. It's a representation of a knowledge base. This means if I have a player who has proficiency in alchemy tools, I then know that in any given situation, if there's anything to do with chemicals or substances, I'm going to tell that player things that nobody else at the table knows because they have a knowledge that no one else has. If I've got a brewer in my group, they're going to know things about restaurants and about different qualities of drinks that nobody else knows. And that is going to be useful for them in certain situations. Now, that is on me. I have to actively remember those things, which is why I came up with a PC cheat sheet that has the tool proficiencies right there so I can remember it whenever I'm prepping. And I actually like to create situations that play to my players' proficiencies. It makes them feel special and feel like they have something that nobody else has. And I found that that is a great way to keep players engaged in the story. So, tools. Are they useful? Are they not useful? Should we be using them more? Should we completely ignore them? Well, honestly, that's up to you and your players. If you use them, and you actively try to find ways to use tool proficiencies, and you encourage your players to be creative and use them and remind them that they have them, then tools actually can be super fun, interesting, and useful. If, however, you and your players both don't find them interesting, don't want to use them, and ignore them, then of course they're gonna be useless. So really, DM, the question is more for you. Are you making tools useless in D&D? And maybe, just maybe, you should give them a try. Until next time, my friends, may your game have advantage. Halfling Hannah here, signing out.